Welcome back to the podcast. This week's guest is Simon Williams. Simon Williams, in his long and varied career, has worked for NME and XFM, all at the same time as running his own record label, Fierce Panda, which was responsible for releasing debut records for Embrace, Coldplay, Keane, and lots of other bands. He's done all this, and he's written a book about it called Pandemonium, How Not to Run a Record Label. We spoke about all this plus much more. It's a fantastic episode for a fantastic guy. I hope you all enjoy this, and I'll be back again soon with another. Thanks. Right, thank you very much, Simon Williams. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. You are a journalist who's worked for the NME. You worked on XFM. You run Fierce Panda record label, and you've wrote a book all about this called Pandemonium: How Not to Run a Record Label. So it's a pleasure to speak to you. And just if you want to get back to the start and how you grew up and stuff like
that. Well, I mean, the Pandemonium book itself is the kind of the story of my birth and the near death of Fierce Panda from start to finish. And in terms of growing up, it was a lot of Walthamstow in East London, and a lot of classic 70s tropes, like, you know, playing football for 17 hours a day, and discovering ELO, and sort of everything stemmed from there, really. In about 1978, that was the first time I discovered the power of orchestral music.
There always seems to be a bit in a young boy's life where they kind of move from football to music. I think it's usually when you realise you're not as good at football as you think you are.
Yeah.
So was that the case for you?
I probably putting a bit too much credence on my sporting skills. No, I never really thought that hard. You know, I grew up I went to school in Edmonton, and there were some really, really good footballers there, because it was that kind of the inspiration of Tottenham just up the road. And we even had the same coloured kit. We even had white shirts and blue shorts and blue socks. So that was a nice touch. Admittedly, at that time, Tottenham themselves were absolutely appalling, and they just got relegated to what was the second division. So you know, I guess you always strive to get that balance right, don't you? You know, kind of like, you know, the best music and the best football, but sometimes it gets quite difficult to carry off.
It obviously, hailing from Walthamstow, I was surprised to read through the book, and there's only one mention of E17 quite towards the end. So you were obviously a bit before E17. So would you consider yourself the most famous Walthamstonian?
There's quite a few people there now, I think, because the Walthamstow village sent it up market. So I think there's been you know, a few people have kind of passed through and more famous, but yeah, I mean, the E17 boys definitely put it on the map, and obviously famously Stay became a massive Christmas #1 song, even though there's actually no reference to Christmas on it. Someone just said, why don't we just stick some bells on and make it a Christmas song? And hey presto, now you hear it every single year. But and I had a really nice that was the most meta E17 moment, was me living in E17 and actually going to the pub with Tony from E17 and interviewing him, because ironic enough, their press officer at London Records was Steve Lamac's wife at the time. So you had this weird interconnection, and obviously E17 themselves were slightly grubbier than the other boy bands of the time. You know, we probably couldn't have got away with covering Take That or any of the other acts, but E17 were kind of filthy enough for us to hang around with. Not for long though; they were really grubby.
And obviously, you've mentioned Steve Lamac a few times as well. I mean, Steve Lamac is a good friend of yours, but there seems to be kind of a competitive edge to your kind of relationship right throughout the years. So I mind reading Steve's book, God, about 20 years ago. So was this kind of a conscious effort to kind of right a few wrongs and catch up with him in terms of book writing?
No, no. I mean, I think it was the problem wasn't competition. The problem was just there was no competition whatsoever because he was just so bloody good at everything. You know, he was just there first. You know, he did the fanzine before I did. He joined the NME before I did. Was a DJ before I was. Everything like that. And obviously, yeah, once he'd written the book 20 years ago, there was little point in me doing a good book because it would have been exactly the same story. So I guess it's just taken me 20 years to create my own agenda and get out of his shadow.
So obviously, when you were young, your father committed suicide. Is that's correct?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the book starts, basically. So how did that affect you then growing up?
I don't know really because it was just because I was so young that you know you have no comprehension of it. I knew it made me a bit different because the 70s, you know, all the kids down my street had brothers and sisters and mums and dads.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only in the 80s that I started meeting people who came from similarly kind of sort of not battered or shattered, but kind of, you know, gently split households. And then, you know, it was only when I had my own daughter that I started to sort of get fret about my dad and start to think about him. And because you start to pace yourself, it got really weird. Like, hang on, how old was my dad when I was born? And how old was how old Scout now? And, you know, so once I got past that age of when I was born, then that made it easier. Then once I got past when Scout became 6 years old, I thought that's another hurdle gone through. You know, and you kind of, you know, and in the end, it's always there to a certain degree, but only like very, very, very background. You know, I never got any help for it, and it was only when, you know, I sort of saw the psychiatrist just before the start of COVID, and you know, it's just a classic for him. You know, tell us about your dad. Oh, he died when I was 5. Magic, absolutely. You know, his eyes were glowing. This was absolutely, you know, psychoanalyst gold. And it was. That's what he said. He said this explains everything. It's been sitting within you for waiting to come out for 50 years.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, well, you're the expert.
Well, this is the thing as well, because you had such a busy life that you it probably took to the kind of circumstances towards the like 2019. It probably took to then for you to settle down and actually have time to stop and think about everything that had gone on before. So you ended up in hospital, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I kind of get the gist of the start of your kind of musical story. Is so just for the benefit of the listeners, tell us what happened there.
So yeah, so I kind of ended up trying to take my own life at the end of 2019, New Year's Eve, as no one ever calls it, and then yeah, ended up in the Royal Free Hospital for a little holiday, and being put back together by the nurses. And it was kind of, you know, there was going to be, they're expecting liver failure, and then that became all right. And then it was going to be all the kidneys are in trouble, and then they leveled out. And then, as we all know, once you spend more than a week in any kind of hospital, you start to get ill because they're terrible places to be when you're sick. But, you know, yeah, got through it, and then, you know, left after had the psychological all clear and the physical all clear after a couple of weeks. And then obviously I was using up an acute bed. So, you know, the quicker they got me out, the better. And then, unfortunately, obviously, the next time I saw that ward was on a program on the BBC Two called Hospital, where the film crew had gone in, and that acute ward had been given over to intensive care COVID patients. So there was there was a bit of context for you, you know, just when I felt bad enough about keep being in a bed that some sort of kidney patient could be using, let alone people about to die.
Yeah, because you were the first person in the acute ward in 2020, weren't you? That was like one of the best achievements in 2020.
It was, yeah. Yeah, congratulations, you're our first patient of the year, said the nurse. Yeah, thanks.
So obviously going back then to the start, like kind of fanzines, and that's when you started going to gigs and selling fanzines and stuff like that. So how did that come about? What made you? What gave you the urge to start a fanzine?
Well, I started going to gigs in 1982, and they just seemed like really, really good fun. And I was only 16 at the time, so I couldn't drink or anything like that. And I'd go and see things like the Farmers Boys and U2. I'd go to this place called the Lyceum.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like 1,500 cap. And then, within a couple of years, I thought, well, what else is out there? And then sort of just started discovering smaller and smaller venues. And then ended up at this place called the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town,
Mm-hmm.
which seemed to be full of complete lunatics and weirdos, primarily because it was. And it was masterminded by this guy called John Fatbeast, who ended up being massive friends with Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine. And for a while, virtually every decent kind of punkish, slightly grungish band would come through there, whether it was Mega City 4 or Snuff or Manic Street Preachers. And that was where, that's where I found the fanzine scene was
Mm-hmm.
kicking around. You had people like Stephen Mack and Mick Mercer at Melody Maker just trotting out their own little publications and then selling them and making money from it, and then spending that money on beer. So this seemed like an excellent idea. So I just kind of followed that really. But I'd been going to like gigs for 4 years before I even started doing the fanzine. That was just a
Uh-huh.
kind of another thing you do to keep yourself entertained.
So when was the first time you bumped into Lamac?
I'm not really sure because we were like ships in the night for quite a while, and and we ended up in this situation where bands would move on from the Bull and Gate and they'd start playing this place called Dingwalls, and there was a Monday night there called Panic Station, and it
Mm-hmm.
was that kind of between point from just after C86 and just before Baggy. So you'd see this real mixture of bands, like you'd see the Lars and the Wedding Present and the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays and all those kind of people. And you had this weird situation where one week you'd do the sales would be really good. So you could like you'd sell a few copies, get enough money for a couple of beers and maybe even a kebab on the way home. And then the following week the sales would be terrible. And
Uh-huh.
uh, and it turned out that's because there was someone else selling a fanzine. There was this bloke called Steve from Essex, and
Mm-hmm.
I bought a copy of his, and he bought a copy of mine. And it was only when I read in his book about that he had the same thing as me, because obviously we were each other. So
Uh-huh.
the other person going along and getting there early for the fanzine buys was him. So he moaned about me in his book, just saying I was stealing his crowd. And then out of that, I was looking through some of our fanzines recently for my book, and there was like, we were just constantly referencing each other. But it took me ages to realise that Steve L was actually the bloke from the NME. He was very very coy about it. He was
Right.
very principled. He didn't sell himself as some NME bloke trying to do a fanzine. He was trying to be very very punk rock about it, which is kind of admirable.
Mm. And obviously, at that point, where you were doing interviews as well with your fanzine, am I
Oh God,
correct?
yeah.
So
First one
how
was
was that? How
1985.
was sorry? How did it feel doing that? Obviously, at a young age, going and interviewing people.
It was
How
absolutely brilliant because you just didn't know what you were doing.
right?
You're an absolute idiot, and you just go. And the first one was like interviewing the Icicle Works, and
Mhm.
we went side of stage at the Electric Ballroom where they were headlining, and just said, "Can we go and can we interview the Icicle Works?" And we just got let in, and then ended up back at the Columbia Hotel, this place of like rock and roll glory over near Lancaster Gate in West London. And maybe we just got lucky with the first interview, but then we pretty much did all the C86 bands who again were really really nice and indie. Um, and and you'd ask them weirdly, just ask them loads and loads of questions about how they felt about the music press, which obviously the music press would never ask them. So you had this, it was quite postmodern. But yeah, and I loved all of that. And then, but towards the end, we started doing bands that hadn't been in the music press. We started discovering our own bands at the Bull and Gate, and really going for it.
Mm-hmm. So obviously that led you into NME. how did that work? How did the transition to NME come about?
Because I was selling the fanzine at a place called Ulu, and Popular Yourself were playing,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a couple of girls there, and I went up to them and said, "Would you like to buy a fanzine?" And one of them said, "I've been looking for you," and it turned out that she was the live editor of the NME at the time, called Helen Mead.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in and got some reviews off her, and so started an 11-year journey.
Yeah.
You have
Which
to
I
kiss a
mean,
lot. You have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince, and you have to sell a lot of fanzines to find that one person at the Popular Yourself gig who's actually the live editor of the NME.
yeah. So if you'd known that, would you just have turned up at that gig and you wouldn't have needed to do all that slog beforehand? If only
Well,
you
part
had
of the
the.
slog, but then it turns out that the reason why she knew so much about me was because she was actually Stephen Matt's girlfriend at the time. So he'd obviously be saying to her, "Look, there's this other nutter out there who keeps going to gigs all the time and trying to sell his fanzine," and that's what they wanted back then. They, loads of us came from fanzines. Stephen Wells did, James Brown did. 80% of the staff had actually come from doing their own fanzine because that was part of the fun. That was the kind of thing. It's like a miniature version of what's going on now. If you talk to book publishers, you've got books out this year by myself, Will Hodgkinson, Ted
Mhm.
Kessler, people like that. And it's and I said to my publisher, what's the difference between us and say, a normal pop person doing a book like Gordon King or Mickey from Lush? And he just said, it's you understand libel laws. So that we don't have to send copies out to people saying, "Can we get away with this?" You self edit, and I think that was the same thing as I ended up becoming live editor at the NME myself after Helen had gone, and obviously I always looked out for the next generation of
Mhm.
fanzine writers because I knew how much it took to get that far, and I knew that they weren't just doing it just to get in the door at the NME. If you want to just get, there are loads of other people who turned up who've been to 2 gigs in their entire life and expected, but they knew they could write
Uh-huh.
and expected a job at the NME. But it's kind of, and some were okay, but the fanzine writers they were the real heart of it all.
Well, I kind of find similarities with the fanzines and stuff that I'm doing, like podcast just now,
Yeah,
because it's people that have got a passion for it, and that's why they're doing it. So, I mean, I'm not making any money for podcasting, but I get to interview people that I want to hear their story. So
yeah,
it's kind of the same sort of thing with the fanzines. You want to speak to people you're interested in. So,
yeah.
um,
And also, it was just an aspect of it, from that little Bull and Gate scene. You had people who became DJs, people who became music writers. You had Andy Ross from Food Records was there at the time, who ended up looking after Blur. You had Chris Myhill was the booking agent who ended up being live agent for Death Cab for Cutie and Keane. We all kind of accidentally found our own path, and but there was no one there saying one day I'm going to run the music industry because we'd have just sort of slapped them and made them buy us another beer. You can't behave like that down the Bull and Gate.
so I mean, one of the first things I noticed about your NME days, you mentioned in the book, uh, on the same day you interviewed Harry Hill, you bumped into Paolo Maldini in a lift, and
Yeah.
you went to see No Doubt. So, I mean, were days just like that? Was that just running the mill days at NME, just randomness?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because the more, it was just you just never knew what you're going to do one day to the next. Um, I guess the Harry Hill one is probably more extreme than most. That's why it stands out because it's not you don't normally bump into the AC Milan squad in a lift in Marylebone, but
Yeah.
it captures the sort of the essence of the madness of it when it was a very hectic time.
Obviously, you started out in the live section, then you moved on to the singles section, where your first single that you reviewed was Made of Stone, in
Hmm.
Stone Roses. So, what was that like doing the singles section? And was that considered then a step up for the live?
Yeah, yeah, that was the most important part of the paper. That was the one you got your photo in there, which was very
Mhm.
exciting. and you could play God for a day by choosing the single of the week. Although most of us chose about 4 singles of the week. To be honest with you, it slightly diluted it, and you just give major record singles an absolute kicking just to balance it all out, because you can't be nice about everything. And it was just absolutely, it was brilliant. And you'd base it, and that's when all records are physical. So you'd go home with a massive IPC carrier bags bulging full of 7-inch singles and 12-inch singles and stuff like that. And that was the highlight, because it was more fun than doing, obviously having a front cover feature was more exotic, but you had to transcribe an interview for loads of hours, whereas with singles, you just sit there and listen to the music.
Melody Maker rivalry. There was.
Mm-hmm.
I used to buy NME and Melody Maker religiously every week, and I actually preferred Melody Maker because Melody Maker went to kind of a glossy magazine first, innit?
Yeah.
So I didn't realise that you worked in the same building.
No, a lot of people didn't.
Yeah, so what was that like? Because obviously you were, as I was led to believe, considered rivals, but you were probably just backslapping each other.
Yeah, no, I mean, some of us got on really well. Again, if you go out to the Bull and Gate and then you'd hang out with nice Melody Maker journalists. Sometimes you go on trips abroad with them, and some were just really nice human beings. Chris Roberts was great. Ian Gittins was good. I was really good friends with Ian Watson. Stud Brothers were really, really, always really good fun, because there was only like a couple of pubs around there at that time as well. It was before the South Bank had been completely revamped. Mm-hmm. So basically you had Oxo Tower, IPC Tower where we worked, and ITV Studios. That was it back then. And so, we went to go down to the Stamford Arms, and that was the local pub for sort of both papers at that time, or the nearest anyway. Most of the time it was fine. There was kind of, if they didn't like us, they just wouldn't talk to us. Mm-hmm. And some took the piss out of the enemy, but no more or less than we took the piss out of Melody Maker. It was kind of like a light-hearted, furious battle that some of us just didn't care about. We just liked drinking.
Well, obviously, Steve Sutherland, he took over NME, didn't he, after he left Melody Maker to join yourselves. So what was that like then when somebody for that side came over to join yours? How did it?
Well, I'd say that's when the battle side of it kind of reared its head. It was just a weird, because he was one of those ones, Steve. You'd see him down the pub normally with Alan Jones, the editor, and then he'd always give you a smile and a hello, and then for some reason he just did this piece on Suede, and he put them on the front cover, and then he just said, "Oh, we were just idiots because we hadn't put Suede in the front, and we were rubbish." And it's like, that's fine, bit weird, but hey ho. And then a year later he becomes our editor, and he goes, now that's weird, that's really weird. and it went as well as can be expected if the publishing overlords expected half the staff to walk out straight away and refuse to come back. So yeah, Steve Lamacq, Andrew Collins, and Marianne Hobbs all walked out, never to come back. Stuart McConey wasn't far behind, and it's still one of the most peculiar decisions in the history of music publishing. I mean, I suppose you could say it was right. I think by the time Britpop was happening, Steve Sutherland was going around saying that he was running the music industry, but I think even I could have edited The Enemy at that point and made it some kind of success, bearing in mind the amount of support we'd given those bands. And, although to be fair, the peak of that was just, it was already the end of it, wasn't it? When they had the Contenders front cover, I thought was one of the most just ridiculous things of all time. Bearing in mind, we'd been writing about Blur for 5 years before Oasis had rocked up.
Yeah,
Blur had been around since 1988. So
Blur were one of the most indie bands there was.
Yeah, and then it was all like, and then it's all on ITV News going, the battle of this, and it's like, that's a good thing. But to be fair, Steve Sutherland, he absolutely stuck it out, and in the end, a form of peace broke out, and he certainly didn't attempt to upset anyone while he was there. It wasn't him coming in sacking everyone and creating a new dawn. He didn't try and bring in a load of friends from Melody Maker. He kind of stuck with it, and basically he just let me get on with rebuilding the entire team. So out of that, it was either right just before he turned up or after he turned up that we got sort of, Johnny Cigarettes and Ted Kessler and James Oldham and Keith Cameron and all those people, and just basically started all over again.
Right.
And just created an absolutely brilliant team. And then throw in, we had like Gina Morris and Sylvia Patterson and Susie Corrigan and some really, really excellent girl writers as well.
Mm-hmm. So some of the things you were responsible for as well, it was you that came up with the Brat Awards. So I mean, it's like one of the coolest award ceremonies you can get. There was always some story to come out of it. It had the best award you could get with the middle finger. Yeah. And also you reviewed the Water Rats review, Oasis.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are some of the things you're responsible for. So a lot of people wouldn't realise. A lot of people don't realise who did this and who did that, who came up with the Brat Awards. So you must be proud of stuff like that you've done, because I mean, I know who done the Brat Awards. I don't know who came up with the Brat Awards. So that's an achievement right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also
it's just another pun, though, isn't it? We need something to compete against the Brits. All right, let's call it the Brats. Right, that meeting over. That was literally, the meeting lasted like 1 minute 30 seconds before we could go back down the pub.
Yeah,
in fact, he was there. We didn't come up with the idea in the pub.
Another quote for you as well, and I don't know if this was at your time at NME or whether it was today with Fierce Panda crossover. The Idlewild quote. It sounded like a flight of stairs falling down a flight of stairs. I heard that quote years ago. Must have been when it came out, and I would never have thought that I'd be speaking to the guy that it came from. That's one of the best descriptions of Idlewild ever.
Yeah, especially those early days. Yeah, because I mean, the original thing was like it's supposed to be sounding like a Dalek falling down a flight of stairs, wasn't it? That was the original thing. Or a kitchen sink falling down a flight of stairs. But yeah, you're right. Idlewild was so shambolic in those early days that flight of stairs falling down a flight of stairs. It was the only way to describe them. And brilliant as well. They're terrific band, aren't they?
Yeah, I mind the first time I seen them at Tea in the Park, and I just happened to come in mid set, and Roddy was just kind of centre stage on the floor on his knees. He'd back screaming, and like I'd never heard him before, and I was just captivated by the kind of chaos it all.
Was he wearing his shoes?
I can't remember. He was still kind of kicking about, and he was wearing a shirt at the time, because I went about 6 months wearing the same sort of shirt as him.
Yeah. No, I noticed, especially in the early gigs in London, he'd always, for some reason, before they started playing any music, he'd always take his shoes off and put them very carefully by his microphone. And I think it must have been a couple of gigs when people just started nicking them. So he just, I'll stop doing that then. the lessons you learn, eh?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to go into Fierce Panda, but before we go into Fierce Panda, because that kind of Fierce Panda spans everything. But you joined XFM, and I was emailing you to get you on the show, and I happened to be like a couple of emails going back and forth, and I was sitting one Sunday with my wife, and I put on a documentary called Kick Out the Jams, the story of XFM, and you happened to appear on it, and I didn't realise you'd been on it, and I thought, that's that guy that he's just sent me an email like 5 minutes ago, saying there he's on the telly. So how did XFM come about? Obviously, I know about it took like a year or so to get a license, but how did you end up on board?
I don't really know. I kind of, I was just in the right place at the right time. I kind of did a test for the station, and then just I thought I was pretty awful, but I just ended up getting asked to do a show. So I thought, all right then, I better do it. And then we ended up getting the license a couple of years later. So that was very exciting, and I really really liked that. I just loved, I'd grown up with DJs, and I just loved the whole concept of just, you can sit there and write 300 words on a record, and people still don't understand what you're talking about. And when you're a DJ, just put it on. You don't have to say anything at all apart from this is quite good, and then people can make up their own mind straight away. And it was a revolution then. When you're hearing bands like Seafood and Campag Velocet at 10 o'clock in the morning, in certain regions in the country, that was a real breakthrough moment. And I think Sammy Jacob got quite a lot of. He came out of the film quite well, I thought. I know Chris Parry got a bit of a kick in because he was the one who masterminded the sell to Capital, but I think it did seem that had to be done at some point. But the only reason why I did the actual film in the first place was because I spoke to a few people, and they said, because I said, well, it means I can get my story in. And they said, yeah, well, the story, well, you basically left to do Fierce Panda, didn't you? And I said, no, I would have given up Fierce Panda in a heartbeat. But when we did the test runs, I'd been doing the drive time show from Monday to Friday. And could say I was a bit conceited to expect to be getting the job full time when the station got the full time license. But to be fair, so did everyone else. Certainly everyone at the NME thought I'd be leaving. And then Sammy phoned me up one day and he just said, how do you fancy doing 7 till 9? And I just went, well, not to mention the name of the Bright Lord again, but I'd be right up against Steve Lamacq on Radio 1.
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? I was going, why would that be brilliant? What's the point of that? That's just absolutely ludicrous because no one's going to listen to me. No one's going to think, oh, so stop listening to Steve on Radio 1 and go listen to, the second-hand copy on a second-hand station. So yeah, that was it. I kind of, and then ended up doing a Sunday afternoon show, and then I managed to piss Sammy off even more by, playing weird shit there. So yeah, so it kind of ended rather abruptly. So I got the opportunity to actually, I got interviewed about that for the film, but then that didn't actually make the final cut. But it's okay,
Yeah,
it gets over. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's in. It's all in the book, Yeah. Also, it was also the story of Ricky Gervais's life as well.
Right. Yeah. I never mentioned that in the notes I sent you over, but what was it like working with Ricky Gervais? Did you have much dealings with him?
No. Weirdly, he did some really good stuff. He was the booker at Ulu, which was my favourite venue at the time. I referenced earlier one of the Pop Yourself gig. So, and he managed Suede. So he was actually, it was cooler than most of us, to be honest with you. But yeah, he was he was a source of great amusement and bemusement on air every day, and people seemed to like him, so that was okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a pain in the arse to be dealing with when you're trying to concentrate on the music and you get him just eating my bit and stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, so.
But don't forget also that Sammy was the great influencer, and there's so much of David Brent came out of XFM.
Right.
Back to I'm the best boss you'll ever have. you can see where a lot of the source material came through for Ricky and Stephen. So again, at least some good came out of it.
So just before we go into Fierce Panda, then with Sammy, and obviously you clashed quite a bit towards the end with like just playing like the songs that you wanted and stuff like that. What's your relationship like? Do you see Sammy anymore?
No, I mean very few people do. Apparently, someone was saying to me the other day he wasn't even invited to the film premiere, which I found a bit perturbing. But then apparently he was actually there. He bought his own ticket and he snuck in at the back,
right,
and watched his life story on screen. I mean, I didn't take it particularly personally, apart from the fact he destroyed my radio career. He was forever storming into. I mean, there were the stories in the film, Tav and people like that saying, anyone who tried to play anything with like any kind of funky beat or a hip hop groove was destined for some kind of, Sammy storming into the studio and screaming at them on air. It's kind of, again, he was obsessed, but that's the problem with radio. They're all obsessed with with listenership, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
Steve and Joe had a problem when they played the Streets the first time on the evening
Right.
session. You know, it's just thousands of complaints from, outraged indie kids going, "What's this? This ain't music." And then finally, 6 months later, they're all watching him at Brixton Academy, going, "This is one of the most amazing things ever." So it's
Mm.
it's always a tough thing, and but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have lasted much longer anyway. By the time Capital came on board, that would have been the death of me. That would have been,
Yeah.
I'd have wouldn't have stood a chance whatsoever next to Heart FM.
Yeah. You could have been playing all your Fierce Panda releases.
Well, this was the great thing because they as DJs, I found the DJs much more accommodating than enemy journalists. They were really, really friendly and really supportive. And the great thing for us was the fact that, because I thought, well, I'm going to carry on doing the label then. And when the station did get its full license, I'd just be doing my Sunday afternoon thing. And we'd have the Llama Farmers, we'd have Seafood, Campag Velocet, we're all on the playlist.
Mm.
So, you're hearing them like all the way through the week. And if I had got the drive time show, then that would have been, it would have been a disaster because I wouldn't have been able to play those records. It would have just been too awkward. But as I say, ultimately, if I'd had the choice, if I'd been given the choice, I would have stayed at XFM. That was my dream job.
Right.
Be the DJ to the nation, mate.
Well, we'll need to start our own. We'll need to start a new radio station. Then I'll give you the whatever show you want. If you don't want to do the evening show, I'll do it. Anyway, Fierce Panda. I was always aware of Fierce Panda because of Embrace.
Mm-hmm.
The first Embrace single was done in Fierce Panda. So that's how I knew about you. And then obviously Coldplay and Keane, they were like the big ones that I knew. But you've been running Fierce Panda for what, over 30 years or close to 30 years? Right. Yeah. So a long time to be running a record label. How did all this start out?
Just in that kind of perfect innocent way, i.e., just three blokes in the pub. And we'd invented this scene called New Wave of New Wave, which was a tribute to a couple of punk rock bands at the time. And we thought this scene needs a tribute record, and we're the most unqualified people to release it because we know nothing about putting records out. But we're 3 pints in, so let's think of a name of a record company. So we came up with Fierce Panda because they're not fierce.
Mm-hmm.
And I quite like pandas. And then I thought, it's not like anyone's going to, time, is it? And in the end, New Wave had quite a long shelf life because it was basically precursor to Britpop. I think John Harris, one of my colleagues at the label, always said that Britpop was kind of New Wave, and New Wave was Britpop without the tunes, which was kind of fairly accurate. But it certainly had all the Adidas chic, and it had all the drugs, and it had that kind of that Camden vibe to it. And bearing in mind, in 1993, the whole world had gone grunge, so it was the start of the fight back. And then 6 months later, obviously, everyone was wearing Adidas in the middle of Camden Town or wherever. And so the only weird thing was that Fierce Panda ended up having quite a much longer shelf life than we expected as well. In which case we would have, if we'd known that, we might have thought a bit more carefully about what we're going to call ourselves.
I think it's a brilliant name. I do. I mean, it stands out. I think it's a brilliant name. I love it. Throughout your time with Fierce Panda, you've released, and these are like the bands that I know. You've released thousands of bands: Supergrass, Ash, Blue Tones, Green Day, Placebo, Embrace, Kaneki, Idlewild, Coldplay, Keane, Art millions, thousands of other bands. But they're the ones that stand out for me. I don't feel after reading your book, I thought I knew a lot about music, but seeing the amount of bands that you mentioned, I was like, over my head. I don't know them.
No.
So is that must be the life of a guy in the music industry within NME and XFM and Fierce Panda. There must be so many bands floating about your head. I don't know how you could remember it all.
Well, I mean, I've got it quite easy. I find, especially nowadays, we know what we're doing with Fierce Panda. We've got we know pretty much exactly what we want to sign. I feel really sorry if you're working for a major label where you have to be onto everything before it's even formed nowadays. I think
Mm-hmm.
back then, part of Fierce Panda's success was just down to the sort of, raging ineptitude of the major labels, really.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason on God's earth why we should have been anywhere near Coldplay or Keane or bands like that. It's just that the majors had already rejected them. So, we ended up just putting their singles out because they had nothing else to do.
Yeah,
And then the singles got on the radio, and then radio changed everything because once they were on the radio, it kind of made all the A&R people sit up again and then, start fighting each other, which is a
yeah,
bit weird.
and then ultimately what happens there, obviously with Coldplay and Keane, you basically get taken away from you. But if it wasn't for yourself, we probably wouldn't be hearing these bands.
Yeah, but then maybe not. Maybe, you can't tell with these bands really because no one looked at Coldplay at the Bull and Gate and thought, one day they're going to be doing 6 nights at Wembley Stadium. They'll be
No,
officially. They're officially the biggest band in the world now. Not the biggest act in the world, obviously, with all your Eds and Adeles and all that. But apparently, they did a. I was out with one of their team the other day, and they did the usual sort of slightly self-deprecating, blushing thing, which is, yeah, we had a chat about this. We think that the 6 nights at Wembley Stadium makes us the biggest band in the world. So, in that kind of that normal, but they've been, they're still really nice to me now. So,
uh-huh.
and maybe, what we lost out in 1999, we've gained just by still having that relationship with them to this day and just having that, that kind of level of the backing, I suppose, that kind of level of endorsement from them. And
Hmm.
at the same time, there's loads of other people who think that we're the worst label in the world because we put out Coldplay and Keane. So you can't win, can you?
Well, I was thinking that about like Chris Martin, obviously, especially. Do you think he's changed? I think that he's changed, but then he's changed again. He's kind of gone back to his old ways. I think.
I
He,
think I think something's triggered them with the book, with the Pandemonium book,
mm-hmm,
because we did a reissue about 4 years ago. We took the first EP, Brothers and Sisters, and we made it into a couple of coloured 7 inches.
uh-huh,
And they were absolutely fine about it. And they were really still with it. But there was one little thing where on the press release we said this chimes in like 25 years since it first came out. And so it's a nice little anniversary touch for the press release. And the management came back and said, can you just get rid of the reference to 25 years? Because the band just don't want to be seen to be getting old. That's why they work with BTS. That's why they work with anyone new that's coming through. So
right.
I don't know if they stop. They don't want to become U2 or something like that. But they've always had that kind of terror of aging in the public's eye. Whereas I think subsequent to the book, I think they've kind of relaxed a little bit,
Yeah.
and certainly the way they've been talking about the panda has been absolutely brilliant and really supportive and acknowledging our place in their history. And bearing in mind, we were only with them for like 6 months out
Mm-hmm.
of however many years it is now. There's no need for them to do that. Just a nod and a wink would be fine. But they seem to be they seem to be even friendlier even friendlier than they ever were before.
Before that, there was Embrace. What was how did you meet Embrace and how did that come about? Embrace was at that time in Britpop. Embrace was my biggest band. That's the band I went to see. So I've always kind of wanted to know how that came about.
It was probably the most corporate thing we ever did. I know people now think that a lot of our early singles, especially, were just basically done deals with major labels. The bands had already been signed and stuff like that. And I think Embrace was probably the only one where that was actually virtually the case. So they've certainly been talking to Hutt for ages, and we knew Hutt really well because we did. They basically signed all the new wave bands. So Smash and These Animal Men had signed to Hutt. Placebo went on to sign to Hutt as well after we'd done them. And Embrace was basically, it was just put to me, said, look, they're going to be signing to Virgin. Do you want to do this single? And I think at that time, 9 times out of 10, I'd just gone, nah. But it's all you good people, isn't it? I mean, It's literally one of the greatest songs of all time. I would have had to sack myself if I turned it down. So brilliant song. Right. And a great. I love the first album as well. I think that whole first album's absolutely terrific.
Yeah, I play that at least once a week.
Yeah,
it's anthems all the way through. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
and when I was about 15 years ago, when I was a young boy, I went to work in a hotel up Melbourne for I stayed there for a month, and it was just all mountains and stuff, and seeing my days off. Just went out with my CD Walkman on and blasted that. It was perfect for it. Wibbling Rivalry, a famous single that, again, I would never have put down to it being yourself. It was part of that. So what was that like then that? Because there's a quite funny story about who you pissed off with putting it at.
Yeah, just it was one of those things where John Harris had done the interview up in Scotland, and he just came back with it. And it was just the funniest thing any of us had ever heard. They just didn't care. Most people by that point, and it wasn't their first interview. It must have been, I'd already done them on the road, already done their on piece, so it must have been the third or fourth interview just for the NME, let alone anyone else. And at that point, I think we all quite liked Oasis. This goes back to seeing what the Water Rats. But there was something just a bit, I don't know, something a bit weird about them. The Status Quo bits and the T-Rex bits and the is this cool? And then I think Wibbling Rivalry just made them really, really cool. Certainly to us when we hadn't been that quite sure. We just turned it into, made a release of it and just turned it to like 14 minutes of swearing. And then we had this whole panic attack on because it was like, okay, so this is a real proper official bootleg. So, we thought we're okay with Creation because, we get on really well with Alan McGee. We've got a good support with the press officer. We like most of their bands. Still not sure about Mishka. But then we had the Sony lawyers phone us up because Creation went through Sony. So it was like, this is a bit of a problem. And then it turned out they just asked for a copy because they'd heard it was just really, really hilarious. So we had to send them a copy. And then we had the chart people phoning up saying, we reckon it looks like it's going to go top 40. So have you got any can you give us songwriting credits? And I said, I was sitting there going, have you heard this? I mean, literally, have you heard this track? You ain't going to be playing this on the top 40 chart rundown. And in the end, luckily, it went in at 52. So we got away with that one. And then one day the NME got a phone call from a representative of the Cray twins. And just saying that because we used them on the front cover because we didn't want to get sued by Oasis. So we didn't use the picture of Liam and Noel. But then we almost got sued by the Cray twins for using a picture of Liam and Noel, but by not using a picture of Liam and Noel. And basically the quote was that the Crays are very unhappy about being associated with a bunch of reprobates like the Gallagher brothers. So we had to pay some money to register choice.
Are you aware who it was that made the phone call? It wasn't like Mad Frankie Fraser or something shouting down the phone.
It was a representative. I don't think it was a close personal friend. For anyone to actually understand. Very scary. Yeah, but a brilliant thing to do. Really, really was. And I did think about reissuing it a couple of years ago, but I thought, nah. No, that'd be too cheeky. I didn't think Liam or Noel would appreciate it this time round.
Well, the thing is, if one of them didn't like it, that's the thing. If one of them didn't like it, the other one would. So you would.
Well, there is that. Yeah.
Obviously, like we touched on Keane, and that kind of got me to Fierce Panda working with like bigger labels like Infectious, and then you started Temptation label as well. Am I right in saying that? So, what was the kind of what would you say the pros and cons are of working with these sort of labels?
The pros are you get free money, and the cons are it's the most futile, stupid thing that anyone can do. And I did it, and I'd known, Tony Wilson's done it, Alan McGee's done it, Mute sold out to EMI. Very, very rarely does it ever end well, because essentially you're putting through alternative acts through a major system, and and the budgets just don't add up. There's no middle ground with the majors. It's all or nothing. And I've been in before with, I've had deals when I've said to, the bosses there, instead of giving one band £100,000, why don't we just give 5 bands 20 grand each? And one of them's bound to become popular. And they just went, wow, it's not really how we work. If we believe in a band, we really want to get in deep. So that's weird. But that's the way it was. There was no middle ground. And then that's what ended our kind of crusade with doing all these singles, really. But to be fair, it's only now that I've realised that it's been we had 10 years of it, essentially. The first year of the Panda was just sodding around doing those little 6-track EPs, and then the second year of the Panda we just went completely punk rock and just started working with bands like Joey Fat and Ligament. And then the third year was when we kind of accidentally hit our stride, and we went from Placebo, Kaniki, Three Colours Red through to Embrace. We thought, that's interesting. People seem to quite like us. And then we carried that through to from 96 to 2006, and then 2006 probably the Maccabees was one of the last singles. At which point the majors just stopped signing guitar bands.
Yeah, I mean the Crabs, they were involved as well. Did you have am I right in saying you had the chance to sign the Crabs and you chose not to?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, it's just one of those things where it was suggested to me by their publisher that it would be a good idea if I signed them. And I just said, all right. Okay. It was just, I don't know. It was very, I don't know. It's,
the thing is, you can't have a constant success rate.
No, and it wasn't even that. It wasn't, you'd see bands that were obviously doing well and they were really hot, like Block Party and Kaiser Chiefs, but it's just, I didn't really like them. So, and that, I think that's good, because it was never the point. We weren't, with all the bands we referenced, we weren't doing them because they were hot and buzzing. We just did them because we liked them, and then they ended up becoming hot and buzzing because we put the first single out, and then it got on the radio. I mean, Placebo, we heard about them after their third gig, and we put on their fourth gig. So that's how early we were. But it wasn't, that wasn't us being weird or creepy or showing off. That's just the nature of the beast, And also, people were really nice to us as well, because we were such a weird little thing, and we were only a part-time operation. We still worked at the NME, so we were like Switzerland of the indie world. So people, other labels would tell us about these bands. Creation who told me about Kaniki. So it was seen as quite a good thing, and people wanted to help us out.
Obviously, like what you mentioned about Block Party and Kaiser Chiefs and things. Kaiser Chiefs were under a different name before that, and they changed, and they kind of changed their style. And that happens quite a lot. There's a lot of bands like Mumford and Sons and what you call it, the Vaccines and stuff, where they've done all sorts of different styles of music until something's kind of clicked and they've got some sort of success with it. So there's obviously that part then as well, where you maybe not be able to take them seriously, or you don't think of them as genuine.
Yeah.
So is that a lot of the case as well? You need to believe in a band fully.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm over myself now. I think I could, I think that was just a polite way of not making out as a complete A&R idiot. by turning these bands down. But yeah, we had both bands on before, and there was part of that. There was definitely an element of it where I just thought, well, I'm not sure. I don't think these people believe in their own music. So, how can anyone else believe in them? And it turned out that quite a few people could really, really believe in what Block Party were doing and what Guys
Yeah.
and Cheats were doing, which was, to be fair to them, they were just, as you say, they just found that ideal musical formula, and that which they didn't have before. And that's what, and that sometimes that name change creates everything, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
So
I did have a couple of years
100%
where I kicked about wearing a tie and pretending I was Ricky Wilson and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah, good days.
yeah, good days. Yeah, I can't remember. I don't know how my liver still survived that. But so while all this was going on as well, and you're running club nights as well, successful club nights all over London. Tell us a bit about that. Obviously, I've got a big long list of names of people that you had on at your club, from Blah, Travis, Stereophonics to the kind of more indie kind of Killers, Razor Light, Keen, Arctic Monkeys. You had all these bands on, so it's obviously spanned a good 10, 15 years of club nights. So what was the idea behind that? Was I would put club nights on just so that I could have a night out. So is that kind of a lot of the thinking behind that?
Yeah, you're just putting on your own party, aren't you? I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds hopeless. I just found that I kind of it started with people just realizing there were certain cachets to the enemy. So we were involved in a night called Club Smash at the old Powerhouse, and that was basically me, Stephen Mack, and my mate Ian Watson all DJing, and that was every Wednesday night, and it was just absolutely brilliant. We had Radiohead, Pulp, Suede, that kind of thing, plus every hot new band. So you think, you know, probably one in 50 bands are actually any good. No, it's not. It's one in 50 bands became successful, which is a very
Uh-huh.
different thing. A lot of other excellent bands came through at that time, but weren't as big, so they don't get remembered. And then I just got the bug for it. I just thought, this is absolutely, I like this. This is it. I like the routine of it. I like the OCD-ness. I like the fact that this combination of the music industry and fanzine writers together, shoulder to shoulder at the bar, and
Mm-hmm.
all enjoying or unenjoying the music, as the case may be. And so we took that forward. Then at that place, we put on the launch night for New Wave, New Wave EP called Shagging in the Streets, and that sold out. And then we thought, this is double marvelous. So yeah, so away we went. So we had Club Spangle, Club Panda, Club Fandango. It was just absolutely non-stop. We did the Water Rats, did Dublin Castle, and it was always during the week. We always, and the sentiment never changed, and we're still doing it now. So
Mm-hmm.
this Wednesday, we've got the Lexington, and we've got Enjoyable Listens headlining one of our current signings with Albert Gold first on, and we've got Lilo in the middle, I've never seen before, and so it's been new and exciting for me.
Right.
And we also do a monthly night at Jaguar Shoes, Dream Bags Jaguar Shoes, sorry, in Shoreditch. Every old man needs to have a favourite new venue. And again, the same combination there. It's kind of, bands. I just find it easier just putting our own bands on. You don't have to deal with other promoters. You don't have to deal with live agents. You don't have to deal with blah, blah. I'm the guest. This is only 5 people and there's only 3 cans of lager. If I'm going to lose money on a gig, I can lose it myself and drink the rider. I'm fine with that. Thank you very much. And you hook up with, the promoter, the main promoter at Jaguar Shoes is brilliant. The sound man's brilliant. The bar manager's brilliant. All these other facets that you wouldn't normally think of because you're just wandering in and just checking out a band. That's what I love about it. I love all that. I've described it as a science of gigs, but someone who is a scientist just said that's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. But I'm still going to stick with the science of gigs. And for example, Jaguar Shoes in probably May time, that was Enjoyable Listens headlining there. And they got 80 people, and then they played the Shacklewell Arms 2 months later, and they got 150 people. So now they're at the Lexington. And again, it's just nice and easy, and it's kind of calm and relaxed, and you're not putting any pressure on anyone, and no one's demanding £5,000 and and buckets of rosé in the dressing room or anything like that. You're dealing with reasonable people in reasonable venues, and I just find it I find it I find it illuminating.
And do you get a big crowd to that then? Because obviously there's lots of these nights all over London. Or there was like years ago. I don't know what it's like now if there's so much of a scene for these sort of
No,
nights.
it's
But
really no. I mean, that's why we're still doing it because no one else has bothered to pick up the mantle. There used to be the Gold Dust night used to be really, really good. That was a Hoxton Bar and Kitchen. That was really industry friendly. But whenever I bump into A&R people nowadays, I say, "Oh, it's marvelous to see an A&R person out and about." It doesn't happen very often. They go, "That's because we don't go to gigs anymore."
yeah,
The showcase days are long gone. The Shacklewell Arms is still, still puts on really good sort of 3-4 band bills. The Victoria I really like. Old Blue Last is slipping a little bit. But it's changed so much. I've been trying to do I was trying to do a gig count this year to go and see 365 performances by different acts
uh-huh.
throughout the year, and it's just become impossible. In the olden days, you'd go to the Dublin Castle and the Bull and Gate and the Falcon and the King's Cross Water Rats, and there had 4 band bills. So,
Mhm.
worst case scenario, you'd see 4 bands. If you timed everything right, you could see 50 bands. It was like every night South by Southwest. And nowadays, so many bands, it's just 2 band bills, which makes it all. If everyone goes on stage at 9 and everyone goes on stage at 10, then you've got no chance, have you?
Yeah.
You're stuck in one venue. So again, we're trying to bust that mold again. You do think at some point, can someone else do this?
Hey,
Yeah,
well,
looking behind, going, anyone else fancy this? But no, no, it's still it. But it just makes me happy. And I think the other key thing is that the bands seem to enjoy it anyway.
yeah. Well, that's the full reason you're doing it. You want to see the bands enjoying it, and you want to see the fans enjoying the bands,
Yeah,
and that's how it progresses. I put on a gig probably about 10 years ago in my local pub, and it was like 3 bands, and I found it the most stressful thing ever. See, trying to organise 3 bands because you think you're dealing with 3 people, but you're dealing with 14 or 15 people. You think you've got every day, but then that band's drummer can't make it because he's got a wedding to go to that night or something. The plans go out the window, didn't they?
yeah, yeah,
So I don't envy the stress of that.
yeah.
Obviously, 2006, you moved out to London,
Hmm.
to a kind of out to Suffolk. Do you think, like reading it from reading the book, I kind of thought maybe like that was the kind of trigger, like obviously slowing down life. Do you think that had an effect then on your mental health and
No, I think it was great for my mental health because being in London, I still felt even by this point, our daughter was 3 years old, so if that was going to be a time to slow down, it would have been then. But I felt sort of morally compelled to just keep going to gigs no matter how bad they were. And I think moving to Suffolk just took that away. I think it worked out that from the house in Holloway, I could walk to 18 venues.
uh-huh.
And it wasn't about 18 pubs or 18 glasses of whiskey or anything like that. It was just like 18 different bands.
Yeah.
You know, that was the addiction. And obviously statistically, how many of those 18 bands in those 18 venues are going to be any good whatsoever? But you kind of you ached when you're at home, which is horrible. Unless you'd been out for 3 nights on the trot and just gone completely mental, in which case your entire body was just saying, please stay at home. So moving to Suffolk wasn't a case of that at all. It was kind of, it was really nice. And it took away that stress. And I kind of tried to engage with sort of local venues and help them out and realize they didn't want to be helped out. And so I stopped trying to help the local venues and just engage. And it's just, it's just a completely, London really is just London, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it really, really, really is. But it's not, it wasn't. I was living a lifestyle that wasn't sustainable to me, and
right.
to a certain degree, the music industry at that time wasn't living a lifestyle that was sustainable for itself, which is why, they stopped signing guitar bands and just started signing pop acts instead. So the timing was perfect on that front. I think I
Mhm.
remember going to an inner city booking meeting, and that was that was where everyone had come from. All the guitar bands for the past 10 years had come through in the city at Manchester under the tutelage of Tony Wilson, and then I remember going to this A&R conference meeting and sitting around choosing the bands, and I think out of about 18 bands, no, maybe 30, maybe about 30 bands. One of them was actually a band, and the rest were all duos or solo artists or anything like that. That's how fast it changed.
Yeah.
You go along. I remember seeing the Heartbreaks play, and everything had just changed. I thought 10 years ago you'd have walked into a £500,000 deal, but now no one's going to touch you with a barge pole. It was such a dramatic turnaround.
So, obviously, we spoke at the start about your suicide attempts during your recovery. Your recovery kind of coincided with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you manage? How did you deal with all that? The recovery, along with COVID, and still having the record label.
Well, it was. I mean, quite a strange time for everyone, wasn't it? Really.
Mm.
I mean, I went home at the end of middle of January. I was back in Suffolk, and then middle of Feb, we kind of started working out what to do with the label. The idea was put the label into hibernation, shut down the London office. Let's take stock of everything. So I didn't know. I knew when I would be going to gigs again.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously within a few weeks, there weren't any gigs, and all offices were being shut down. For once in the entire history of Fierce Panda, the timing was incredibly perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was also brilliant for anyone close to the label, because it meant that the story was that I'd been a bit ill, and then everyone was a bit ill. So again, it's kind of who's going to care about me when you've got millions of people dying? My problems were insignificant, so it's good. Whereas if life had just carried on as normal, that would have been completely different, I think. But I was just allowed to sort of just carry on with it. And then I think the one thing we managed throughout COVID was we managed to get out a newsletter every month. That was the key thing. Obviously, there was no touring whatsoever. And luckily we had some bands that were close knit. So, for example, with China Bears, Ivan and Fraser from the band are twins. So they moved back home to the West Country together. Desperate Journalists are two couples. So they were, cohabitating. Moon Panda is a couple. It was the bands who lived in 5 different places, even across South London, who were absolutely screwed because they couldn't rehearse, so they couldn't write, so they couldn't record, so their careers absolutely stalled. We revisited the 6-track EP idea for the COVID sessions, which is basically COVID versions, i.e. cover versions, and that did really well. Some of the bands, each band did a song by like Pulp or Strokes or people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just basically readied ourselves for coming out of it. So the first thing we did was we did a little pandemic ammonium fest at the Victoria, just kind of 5 nights of music to celebrate coming out of it. Although half the bands couldn't make it, obviously, because they caught COVID. So that was, and obviously everyone was really scared. Half the people wore masks and half the people didn't. It was incredible. I mean, it feels like it was like a century ago, doesn't it? But
yeah,
it was just insane, wasn't it?
It was mental. I mean, it's only like it's just over a year before I went to my first gig again. I went to see Billy Bragg at the Barrowlands, and it was, and obviously that's an older crowd anyway. So looking around, that everybody was wearing masks, apart from myself. I wasn't wearing a mask. I was like, I'm not wearing that. It'll be too hot, jump a bit. But the crowd that was there, they were too old to be jumping a bit.
Yeah.
But
also, the other lucky thing for me was getting what I did out of the way, the grand malarkey, as we call it. I got it out of the way, because otherwise, the state of my brain before that, I don't know what COVID would have done. COVID might have finished me off anyway. Might have just been that really is the final straw. But luckily, I was in a much healthier position and on medication and being extremely well looked after. So it was absolutely fine. And as I said, if there was one thing that might have driven me slightly a little bit balmy, it could have been FOMO. in terms of not being able to go to gigs, but because there weren't any gigs, there was no FOMO because there was no mo to fo.
That might be the best quote for your Idlewild quote. Just before we go into your heroes, what's your future plans for yourself, for the record label, and just life in general?
Well, I mean, one never wants to look ahead because then one gets disappointed. I'd say furthest that we're literally looking at is probably the end of February for our 29th birthday party.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the back of my mind is thinking about celebrating 33 and a third years of Fierce Panda. So that takes us another 5 years, I guess.
Right.
I did actually write down the specific date the other day. I mean, the mind boggles as to what music industry is left, or into some kind of smashed ways. Maybe we'll be doing it on the moon by then. That's the latest I heard. NASA's now going, oh, we haven't been here for 50 years, but now we're going to be living here within a decade on the moon. Brilliant. Back to, I'll dig out my ELO records again. I think it's just the same old, really. Just just carrying on. I think we've got a niche now, and we're never going to be signing the new Stormzy or the new Dave or whatever. Or I don't know if guitars are really going to come back again in the way they ever were before. Bands are still being signed, but most of them are rubbish, to be honest with you. But I just find that what's fascinating to me is just on the underground, as ever, the level of music the quality of music is absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, it's always there.
Every single night and find something, even if it's not the best band in the world, it could be the most interesting band in the world. And we've done a booked Pandemonium Festival for January, and it was an absolute breeze. We've got like 21 bands, 24 bands, something like that, and I think they're all gonna. I don't think any drummers are going off to weddings or anything like that. I think they're all professional, understand the need for it, and we've actually started. We've announced it and everything with dice links, so we're ahead of the curve. So we just hope that if there are any blizzards at the start of Jan, and I think that's the main thing. As I said before, without the bands, Fierce Panda is nothing. Without the venues, we're nothing. So if you've got good bands playing good venues, that's all I need. There'll always be. There's no point in stopping. There's no point in just going, oh, I'm not putting any more records out, because you'll just walk into a bar next week and just like, oh, they're absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, you drive yourself mad,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just end up accidentally doing it. The classic. Would you want to do a single on Fierce Panda?
Well, what I'll do is I'll post the links to Fierce Panda for all your stuff for your festival and anything else that a link for your book and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The last bit of the podcast is obviously, because it's called Time for Heroes, I asked for 4 heroes to come for a fictional dinner party. They can be dead or alive, whatever aspect of life you want them to be from. Just let me know who your heroes are and why they're your heroes, why you're coming for dinner, and what you would cook them.
Well, this is a weird one because of, if you count the fanzine and you count the NME and you count promoting gigs and you count Fierce Panda, that's a lot of potential hero status people I've met. It's kind of, I've been stared at by Peter Hook from New Order, and I've interviewed Scott Walker and Burt Bacharach, and obviously I've worked with DJs like Stephen Mack and John Peel, and obviously I've done Chris Martin, and I've hung out with Oasis, so you kind of there's quite a few choices there, so I've got to a bit outside the box. So the main one, my first guest would be Johan Cruyff.
Brilliant. So I love a footballer in this.
The greatest, literally the best player in the world to never win the World Cup. So that saves the ongoing debate about him versus Pele versus Maradona versus in the olden days. And I just loved his attitude as well as his skills. There was that great story about he was Holland were endorsed by Adidas in the '74 World Cup, He had his
The
own personal
striper.
deal with Puma. And so if you look on his kit in that thing, he only had 2 stripes on his shirt because he tore
Yeah,
one off because he refused because he was being paid by another company.
yeah.
And I like the fact,
That's
and he
a
also
brilliant story.
and he smoked, which was also brilliant.
Mm.
And then obviously years later, he ended up in charge of Barcelona and then nurtured Pep Guardiola. So essentially, he's the father of modern day football. Because
Yeah.
without Johan Cruyff, Man City would not be Man City. Next to him, I'm going to kind of cross over from football to music, go for Pat Nevin, the most indie footballer of all time. That's the dream for everyone, isn't it? You're rocking out there in the FA Cup final with the Cocteau twins on your headphones. He's living the best of all dreams, isn't he? And I was listening to him today, and he was doing the Five Live co-coms, as they call it now,
Uh-huh.
on the Qatar Ecuador mismatch. And I was just reminded of his skills. He just seems like a very, very nice man. And
Yeah.
do you remember the story about him with he used to buy 2 copies of the NME
I've
because
heard that vaguely,
when he was at
aye.
Chelsea, because they just go into his bag and just set fire to it or rip it up. So
Yeah.
he just very calmly had a spare copy in his car, and then he'd just read that on the way home. So a man with intelligence as well as great skill.
I've heard Pat Nevin on. I think Brian McClare's got a podcast as well, and
Right,
Brian McClare's another one. He's right into his music, and the two of them, when you get both of them together, they
yeah,
go off on a wee musical tangent. They
and of
don't want
course
to talk
Stuart
about.
Pearce as well.
Yeah, he was into his punk, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah, and still is
Yeah.
still going down the pit. Well, it says he wasn't down the pit. No, who did he go and see the other day? He was at the Roundhouse for something, and he said, "Oh no, no, I wasn't down in the pit. I was upstairs in the balcony. I can't do the pit anymore." My third one is flipping it slightly. It's Paul Heaton,
Right.
and, mainly because I'm not an enormous fan of House Minds or Beautiful South, but I had a very long conversation with his drummer the other day, who
Uh-huh.
explained about how Paul's basically never won an award, even though he's outsold his peers by 40 million to one. He's
Hmm.
just never been that kind of never been controversial enough or wild enough to hoover up all the awards all his peers have got, which does annoy him slightly. But at the same time, he still pays his dues, and like he takes out new bands all the time.
Uh-huh.
I think he's got Billy Bragg's doing the next tour, but that's quite weird for him. Normally, he's taking out Lathams and Raytons and bands like that.
Yeah.
Showing them, basically all the new House Martins. So and also he he collects crisp packets,
Right.
which is one of my little skills. And hopefully now I've befriended his drummer. My next project is to do a book on crisps and crisp packets, and hopefully I can get an interview with Paul. Maybe it will be this special night. I could
Brilliant.
talk to him about it,
That's brilliant. And
and then
see if you
we
get
can ask
Paul
Pat Niven
Heaton.
what his favorite flavor is.
Well, if you get Paul Heaton, once you're done with him, send him my way because I've been trying to get him on this podcast as well.
There you go. I will in that case. And then the last one is lastly Janice Long,
Right.
because as I said before, I sort of love all DJs anyway, and I really really admired her because she was there in the 80s where but just basically her and Addie Nightingale, wasn't it, in the
Mm-hmm.
midst of all the smashy and nicey crowd. So whenever she appeared on Top of the Pops with her back home hair, it was always brilliant. And then she was also a DJ on XFM when it first started, and she was really really lovely to me. That when I
Mm-hmm.
was I knew nothing, and I really looked up to her. And then of course it wasn't so long ago that she passed away. I think it was cancer did for her in her mid 60s. But even up until the end, she was on Radio Wales and playing heaps of Fierce Panda records, and always enthusing about us and making a point of saying that was on Fierce Panda and they're a brilliant label,
That's
which was really
brilliant.
nice.
And what would you cook them? That's a lot. Are you a good cook?
I I'm not
Yeah.
disastrous cook, but I wouldn't cook for them anyway. I'd take them out. We'd go to the Shackerwell Arms in Dalston.
Brilliant.
So as I said earlier on, you've got really good 3 or 4 band bills, so you can always trust there's going to be something interesting going on. You've got big screens for the football, which is still fairly unusual for most indie venues. They get a bit confused about why would we want to show football? We've got bands on. And crucially, it's got a lovely, lovely smoking area for Johan Cruyff.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. Simon, you've been a fantastic guest. It's a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll post all your links everywhere. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Time for Heroes podcast. If you would like to get in touch, the best way is on the Facebook page, Time for Heroes podcast, or on Instagram at Time for Heroes podcast, or Twitter at Time for Heroes P1, or drop me an email at timeforheroespod@gmail.com. You'll find Time for Heroes on all podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Google and Amazon. Please leave a review where you can, share with others, and more importantly, enjoy.